Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along this evening to the final event in this semester's series of Edinburgh Futures Conversations. My name is Professor Sian Bayne. I work here at the University of Edinburgh. I'm director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education. And welcome to you all, both those of you that have managed to make it into the room tonight and for the many people who are joining us online. We're really honoured that you're here. So this is, as I say, this is the third of three Futures Conversations. In the first conversation, which was chaired by Sarah Brown, we discussed the future of education in the context of global crises and the right to education. In the second, which was chaired by Professor Soteria Grech, probably a fair few people in the audience have been at both, we discussed education and the concept of utopia. And in both of these conversations had a clear, though I would say quite different perspective on the purpose and function and almost the aesthetic of education. So the first conversation about crisis, it saw education as a human right, one of the most fundamentally significant dimensions of our ability to come together to enable collectively human flourishing, reducing inequality and supporting peace. So in that conversation, we talked about how the crisis of every individual child who cannot access education because of war, oppression, poverty, migration, is a crisis for all of us collectively. And we also talked about how education can function as a driver for economic growth. So that was the first one. The second conversation, we really switched tack and we talked about education, not so much as an engine for the knowledge economy, but education as a way to keep the door open to utopia. So in that conversation, we talked about the need to move beyond this sense of an abstract hope that we all have for the future, and more towards the clear articulation of our desires for a better future and how we can come together and work together to imagine and then build that better future. So an explicit aim of this Futures Institute is that we create the space for those kinds of conversations. And I think it's a conversation that we are going to be continuing tonight when we talk with three amazing experts about education and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not a theme like crisis or utopia. It's a techno-social phenomenon, and it's one to which we attach an abundance of hopes and fears and desires and resistances. The rapidity with which, particularly since the launch of ChatGPT just over a year ago, the rapidity with which generative AI has woven itself through the public consciousness has been even more rapid than it has with previous technologies, the internet itself, smartphones, social media platforms. Each of these technologies has changed not just what we do, but who we are, and central to the conversation tonight, how we educate. And AI is being described as the greatest disruptor of all. I want to emphasize that AI is not a tool. It's what one commentator recently called a productivity schema laid across the full spectrum of the post-industrial economy. So in that context, what does it mean for education? What does it mean for learning? And what does it mean for the nature of knowledge itself? So these are all questions under discussion this evening. The format of the event will be a panel discussion with our amazing panelists who I'll introduce in a moment. Then we will have plenty of time, hopefully about 15 minutes for audience questions and comments. And then the event will end, as the other two conversations did, with the reading of a piece of poetry that has been commissioned especially for this event. And this will be its first airing, and our poet for the event tonight is J.L. Williams. So for now, let me introduce our panel. So closest to me here, we have Dr. Araba. Araba is Deputy Director at Research ICT Africa, where she leads research in building evidence for policy making on digital and data governance across Africa. She was previously Principal Research Scientist at the University of Washington and Head of Research at the UN University Institute on Computing and Society in Macau. Her work covers gender, digital equality and inequality in global, regional and national contexts. And she studies trends in the development of artificial intelligence for development in Africa and approaches to democratizing knowledge creation. It's terrific to have you here. Next we have John Warner, who is a well-known writer, editor, speaker, and author of 8 books, including, I love this title, Why They Can't Write, Killing the 5-Paragraph Essay and Other Necessities. John has been blogging about higher education, inside higher education, for over a decade, and he writes weekly about books and reading culture at the Chicago Tribune, and in his associated newsletter, The Biblioracle Recommends. And John's 9th book, More Than Words, How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI, is going to be published in the US in February, although he tells me we're going to have to wait a little bit longer than that before we can see it in the UK. Finally, Dr. Ben Williamson, on the sofa, is one of the most influential academics working in the field of critical digital education. He's based here in the Centre for Research in Digital Education at the Futures Institute and Murray House School of Education. And this is where he kind of helps drive really the global conversation about AI, data, and platforms in education. Ben's editor of the journal Learning, Media and Technology. His books include Big Data in Education, The Digital Future of Learning Policy and Practice, and he runs the exceptional, highly recommended blog Code Acts in Education. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Kicking off with our first sort of question for the panel, just what is your story? How did you come to be thinking so deeply about AI in education? John, why don't you go first?
I have very little care or interest for technology, but I have a deep history and background in reading and writing. My mother opened a bookstore in the town I grew up in, Northbrook, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, when I was a year old. And I've spent my entire life in companionship with books. And over the time, that morphed into a life of writing and teaching writing, primarily to first-year college students. And in the early 2000s, I started to notice a significant change in my students, not in terms of their ability to write, or their skills around writing, but their attitudes. They were disengaged from the experiences that I thought were inherent to writing. They've been taught a sort of prescriptive method. That is, the 5-paragraph essay in the US is sort of the avatar of, where we write according to these formulas in order to pass an assessment that will allow them to be judged proficient as writers. And what I saw instead was generations now of students who had not actually experienced writing as I did, which was a manner of thinking and feeling and coming to know my own mind and communicate the contents of my mind and my feelings with others. And that began to disturb me, so I became very invested in changing the conversation around writing and how we teach writing. And then ChatGPT showed up in November of 2022, and I started getting a lot of emails about, can you come talk to us about this? Because people were convinced this was going to destroy the high school essay and the college essay. And I had been on record previously as saying, let's go ahead and destroy that stuff, because it's not doing our students any good. We should be thinking about writing differently to begin with. Now, unfortunately, we're substituting automated syntax generation via ChatGPT for automated syntax generation by students following prescriptions. This is not an improvement in my view. So my work going forward is trying to help us understand the inherent interest of writing as a human activity that's unique to humans, that is distinct from the automatic syntax generation that is done by large language models such as ChatGPT.
Thanks, John. Araba, what's your story?
First of all, I'd say that I won't say I've thought deeply about AI in education, but I've certainly thought deeply about the role of technologies in general in society. So I grew up in Ghana on a university campus, so relatively privileged in my country's context. I touched my first computer when I was in the university, and I got my first laptop in, I think it was the year 2000. Got a cell phone for the first time, I think in 2005, kicking and screaming because I didn't want to get one. But over the years, I noticed three things. One, how digital technologies were permeating sort of every aspect of human existence across domains. I also noticed how consistently we expect digital technologies to solve analog problems, so the analog problems of the world. And then I also noticed how new technologies tend to drown out the history of our experiences with previous technologies. So new technologies are always going to be the thing that solves the problem, and especially with application to developing countries, which is where I was, where I grew up. When I was growing up, the indicator of development in a country was the number of newspapers they had. So there's always been this idea that these technologies, information and communication technologies, are somehow an indication of development, of human development. At the same time, as I said, I'm noticing this trend. I was also noticing that in my own life, I could see the benefits of technology. But I'd look around, and for a lot of the people that I felt would most benefit from the technologies, I wasn't seeing the kind of change that I'm experiencing in my life. So just becoming aware of that inequality and the fact that the benefits of the technologies are not distributed to everyone has made me question the extent to which these technologies are the right tools for solving, as I said, analog social development problems. So the question I'm asking myself is AI going to be the same? Is it going to be different? If it is going to be the same, or if it is going to be different, for whom and in what ways? And those are the questions that, I would say keep me awake sometimes at night, just because of the increasing push and almost fatalistic, view that these technologies are already taking over our lives and we just need to sort of go with the flow. That's what bothers me.
Yeah.
That's why I think about these issues.
It's heartening that I think they bother so many people, and so many people are here tonight to try and surface them together, which I think is fantastic. So Ben.
Yeah, I guess my interest in AI really started about 20 years ago. I was simultaneously working in an education technology think tank in Bristol, in the south of England, where we were experimenting with technologies that, at the time, the promise seemed to be maybe you could use these to personalize education in some way. Could you use social networking sites to adapt the kinds of material that students saw? So I was doing that in my day job. But then in the evenings, I was doing postgraduate research in literature. So I was reading all of these lovely sci-fi novels and future dystopias and so on. And one of those novels was The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson, which some of you may have read. Quite famously, there is an education technology in the novel The Diamond Age called the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer. It's supposed to be a kind of interactive, almost artificially intelligent book that adapts to and responds to the reader. So at the time I was reading this in the evening and thinking about, oh wow, there's all this kind of sci-fi stuff about artificial intelligence, and I was thinking, during my day, it's like we're grappling with similar kinds of issues. So I think that was what really got my interest. But there's a particular twist in the Diamond Age, which is that the interactive primer, this device, has a human in it. There is an actor constantly doing the instructing, reading the stories to the user, doing the adaptation. So I think it was a particular moment where I started to think about artificial intelligence type technologies as somehow being peopled, that there are always humans inside them in some way. In the Diamond Age, it's a particular kind of actor. But all artificial intelligences are like that too in many ways. There are producers who have to make them, who have to make choices about what these technologies are supposed to do. And so on and so forth. So in the work I've been doing at Edinburgh and for a few years before, certainly over the last 10 years, I've been trying to look at issues around AI, big data in education from a more kind of sociological perspective, which means looking at who are the social actors producing it, and that doesn't just mean the technologists and the engineers. It also means the investors who are putting the money into it, because without the investment, the technology can't exist in the first place. It means marketing people and so on. But then the second part of the kind of challenge of trying to understand AI is how it is how it is interpreted by different social groups. So how an engineer and a technologist in a big business understands what AI is and what it might do for education might be very, very different from what a policymaker thinks about AI in education and what it could do, which might also be quite different from what a teacher in a classroom. So I've come from that kind of noticing the kind of human in the loop aspect of AI in literature to now trying to think quite significantly about who are the social actors involved in producing and adopting and using AI.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. The more I think about AI, the more I think that actually a background in literature is a really good way of thinking about what it is and what it does. Thank you all. So I guess my follow-up question is, we had a fantastic inaugural lecture from Shannon Valler in this room a few weeks ago she was talking about her book, The AI Mirror. And it was an extended conversation about how artificial intelligence, it doesn't generate new knowledge, it mirrors what we already know. Her discussion was much more sophisticated than that. But it made me think it would be very interesting to know what your kind of prime metaphors might be for artificial intelligence, particularly in relation to education. I gave the panel a bit of a warning about this one. So, Ben, I don't know if you want to kick off on that one.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess metaphors around AI always give away our kind of normative orientation. That the choice of a metaphor says what we think about it. I was quite drawn by Bruce Sterling's metaphor. I think it was in one of the big American weekly magazines, where he described ChatGPT in particular as like a Frankenstein's monster that just has voltage shot through it after being stitched together from lots of dead different bits and pieces. So it kind of sits up on the slab and moans. But that does say something very particular about my kind of normative orientation towards AI, perhaps. I suppose there was a nice essay a week or two ago by Melanie Phillips, where she describes the way in which the language of AI is already full of metaphors. The idea that some kind of computing system is intelligent already is a metaphor that likens a computing service or a process to a human kind of process. The idea of neural networks likens these computers to the functions of the brain, when they're based on some kind of biomimetic principles, but function ultimately very differently. Machines don't really learn. They can't really be trained. So I think it's really interesting to look at the way in which metaphors function through the kind of often the discourse of technologists to kind of develop some sense of a symmetry between us and the machines, which also I think helps amplify the idea that these are often much more capable than they really are.
Yeah, good one. Thank you. John?
I'm a fan of a comparison that comes from Emily Bender, who is an American linguist and artificial intelligence researcher who likened large language models, specifically ChatGPT, to the magic 8-ball. If you know that children's toy where you ask it, it's a globe with a floating cube. I think it's a 24-sided cube in it. You ask it a question and you shake it around, and then it gives you an answer, and you're meant to interpret your life through the magic 8-ball. So you might say, does so-and-so like me? It'll say, odds are not good, or ask again later, or that sort of thing. And she uses this as a metaphor because she's trying to remind us that the meaning we find in the outputs of generative AI, large language models, is entirely the byproduct of human interpretation and projection onto those things. They have no capacity for reason, they have no capacity for feeling, they have no sensory experience or memory of the world. They are entirely a distillation of language that's, and then syntax generated through human prompting. Researcher Baldur Bjarnason calls this the intelligence illusion, where, and likens it to a psychic con, where we start asking ChatGPT questions, and when it's correct, we're amazed, and when it's wrong, and we get to say, oh no, you're wrong, and it says, oh, I'm sorry, I was wrong, we're even more impressed, because now it's learning from us, so we're having a human interaction. And I find keeping these metaphors in mind useful, because it's easy to be amazed by the technology, and I include myself among the group who have been amazed by it. We think it is capable of true magic, as opposed to the illusion of a magic 8-ball. And as a reminder for how I think we should consider these and maintain human agency over it, we should remember that we are projecting humanity onto these things as opposed to them possessing some sort of inherent human qualities themselves.
Thank you, John. Araba, what are your thoughts?
I'm probably going to sound like a broken record by the end of these 1.5 hours, but I'd say for me, I think of AI as old wine in new wineskins, or a longtime friend with whom I have a complicated relationship. And I think you can, you can get what I mean, so I'm not going to go into sort of long explanations. But I do recall that in the sort of the parable of the old wine in new wineskins, the idea is that the old wine in the new wineskin might destroy the new wineskin that it's been put in. So, I mean, in a way, I'm not thinking about this just as, the same old thing, same old, ideas being presented to society, to humanity in a new packaging, but also, something that could potentially be destructive to the packaging that it's being presented.
Yeah, I like the idea of it as a troubling friend as well.
Yes.
Maybe more more frenemy than a friend. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And it would be interesting to shift now, I think, to a sort of a broader conversation. Really, because we have three colleagues here who are from different regions of the world, have expertise in very different regions and different perspectives as a result of that on AI in education. And I wonder, could you say something about what you see as being fundamentally maybe problematic about AI in education? There's often some sort of, people often complain that when we talk about AI, we always talk about it in very dualistic terms. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it dystopic? Is it utopic? But actually, sometimes that is quite a helpful framing for just surfacing some of our perspectives. So can we think a little bit about where and why AI is problematic, and perhaps distinguishing between the forms of AI, from large language models to other kinds of AI, because I think it's important to sort of have to sort of nuance the conversation in that way. John, maybe you'd like to kick off on the problematic dimensions of AI from your perspective.
When I think about these things, I'm referring to generative AI, right? This thing that has suddenly invaded the education space in the US and I assume elsewhere, unbidden. Nobody asked for it, and it showed up, and now it's ubiquitous. If you open a Google Doc or Microsoft Word, it's there prompting you, would you like to use AI? If I try to promote myself on LinkedIn, it's like, say something with AI, and no thank you. My chief concern about generative AI in the context of US education is that it exacerbates what I think is an existing rather tragic problem with our educational system, is that it's become nearly entirely transactional, where discrete activities are done for reward, like a grade. Those grades aggregate into passing a class, into passing a level, into moving on and on and on. And it's created a system where students experience a life of indefinitely delayed benefit. You do this for some future good, as opposed to a life lived of experience, how we actually live life, day to day, month to month, year to year. And the transactional system of US education has proved entirely alienating. There's record absenteeism, there's record low engagement with school. All of these things predate generative AI. We now have this tool that allows students to fulfill many of these transactions we've built for them and that we've decided are meaningful by simply entering a prompt and clicking a button and sharing that result. Much of the energy in the US has been around policing that transaction, trying to prevent students from using this to satisfy the transaction. I would like to see much more energy put in towards re-energizing and revivifying the experience of school. The difference, the way I frame it, both in Why They Can't Write and my upcoming book, is the difference between schooling and learning. Students have become very, very habituated to schooling and increasingly alienated from learning. And to the extent that generative AI streamlines and makes schooling more efficient, it greatly worries me. If it could be used as a tool that enhances learning, it could be a great friend to us. But this is not how it's being used in its earliest rollout. It's not how it's being used by students as they natively come to this and use it for their schoolwork. So that's my
in terms of this
concern.
In terms of the sort of current political context in the US, do you see the dangers being further amplified?
Yes. We have a president, an incoming president who exists in an entirely transactional mindset, who is significantly beholden to our largest tech companies, who have a conduit through him through what I'll just say are for all practical purposes, bribes. And they will receive favored status for these things. There will be no regulation, there will be no policing, there will be an acceleration of all of the potentially bad things. I haven't even talked about the potential catastrophic environmental effects of increasing use of this technology. It is a great worry. There will be no sort of public, systemic level public check on this technology. It will be up to collectives of individuals who make an affirmative decision to resist what I think is a trend that will become more and more prominent and pushed as the vehicle for students developing their human capital so they can succeed in a future world, as opposed to considering the lives we live in the present, as well as the future world we would actually like to live in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and Araba, what's your view, and from the context, of the African context, what are your thoughts on the problems that we're looking at?
Yeah, I think irrespective of what type of AI we're thinking about, for me, one of the most problematic aspects is that the risks and benefits, as well as the opportunities and the harms of digital technologies are unevenly distributed to different groups. So the opportunities and the benefits tend to be experienced by certain types of people or groups, and the risks and the harms also tend to be experienced by a different type of people or groups systematically. And so if we're using AI to improve education delivery systems, for example, which schools are going to be able to afford these new technologies? And in our context, where there's already very serious resource constraints between urban and rural areas, for example. So which schools are going to be able to afford those technologies and therefore have their students have a better quality of education delivered to them? If we're thinking about AI as a general purpose technology, we're thinking about generative AI and so on, which students in a class are going to be able to afford which generation of generative AI, right? Because I don't know, every other how many months we learn that there's a new generation now that's more powerful, that does its work better than the previous. So again, that uneven distribution means that we're going to have the Matthew principle, as it were, be reinforced over and over and over again. Those who have more is given, they get more, and those who don't have, even the little that they have actually is being taken from them. So to me, that's one of the biggest problems from the perspective of achieving equitable socioeconomic development.
Yeah, thank you. And Ben, what are your thoughts? I guess from a more European context, what are your thoughts?
I suppose I still have a little bit of a problem with this term AI itself, because it does encompass so much. Maybe three things. The first thing it encompasses is what I sometimes think of as non-AI. So quite a lot of products get marketed as having AI somehow built in them. And this includes in the education technology industry, where really the functionality is much more rudimentary. Then there's what we used to call data analytics or predictive analytics or learning analytics, which are very much technologies about monitoring students' activities, their behaviors, their progress in learning activities through their data traces, and often making predictions about future progress or trajectories as a way of then enabling educators to change what they do in practice, or in fact automating decisions about what students, what sort of content they receive. Then of course we've got the third version of AI, which is the generative AI stuff about producing text, images, and audio now. All three of them are problematic, but particularly the non-AI AI in some respects. But in relation to generative AI, I'm really taken by the framing offered by the sociologist Mike Anani. He says we should treat generative AI as a public problem. He says public problems are large-scale things that really affect us all, and he likens them to climate, pollution of the environment, and to childhood education itself. These are matters which really affect us all, which affect our societies. So he says these kind of public problems should never be outsourced to private interests or charismatic authorities. They need to be deliberated, publicly contended with, and so on. So I find that quite a helpful framing. It invites us then to look at what are some of the specific problems around generative AI, because these are much more significant than issues of technicality or issues of whether a particular device can or cannot have some kind of small-scale evidential effect on some small sample of learners and so on. I'd just highlight one particular problem with generative AI, I think, which is its likely intensification of a series of problems that we already probably have, particularly in the schooling sector. And one of those is around, one of those intensifiers is the idea that teachers could use artificial intelligence to plan their lessons and do their marking. So taking away that kind of pedagogic work of actually planning what you're going to do, selecting your resources, and then afterwards assessing how students have done. It seems to me that reduces the idea of teaching to a set of just routine, repetitive, technical tasks. It opens up an awful lot of teaching for automation. And it also takes away the idea that teaching is a profession that's based on subject expertise, interpersonal relations, and so on. So I think that's a real issue in terms of intensifying this kind of degradation of teaching as a profession, as well as some of the effects that this could have on students and their thinking and their writing and so on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think the idea in particular of AI as a public issue or a public problem actually connects quite nicely to what I wanted to talk about next, which is we had a cup of tea in the cafe around the corner before we came along, and we were talking about the problems with AI, and then I was like, how do we talk about the possibilities of AI? Where are the glimpses of hope and positivity? And everyone was like, But there are, I think, some glimpses, and I would quite like the panel to have to sort of say something about what those glimpses are now. Are there ways in which AI can make our education better? Who wants to respond to that first?
I'm happy to go first because I had to think about this quite a bit and challenge myself to see something positive because you don't want to always be the yes but person. So, and it did occur to me that if all the answers, let's say assuming AI is correct, and I'm talking about generative AI here, for example, if all the answers are available and a student can just go and use generative AI and get the answers to whatever topic are going to be discussed in a class on a particular day, then the focus of teaching could switch from what people know to what people think. So I, as an instructor, would come into class and say, okay, you found all that information, and now tell me what you think about it. And I think there's something actually potentially exciting about that, where we completely rethink what it means to get an education. It's not about learning A, B, C, D, E, but it's learning how to think about A, B, C, D, E. And I think if we can start moving in that direction and seeing whether there's that potential in that kind of method, there could be some hope. Yeah, I don't know if we can do it, but I think that would be really interesting.
Yeah. Do either of you like to respond to that?
I would say, tying together the last two answers, to achieve something like that requires us to respect the profession of teaching and the expertise of teachers. That's how I teach already. I'm uninterested in students parroting answers to me. I loathe the idea of students coming into a class and learning what I think and then spitting that back at me like, regurgitating that into an essay. But to preserve that, and where AI could be useful is if we do allow teachers who understand teaching, the problem of teaching, the challenges of learning, who treat it as it is, at least as I experienced it through 20 years of teaching, 20 plus years, as a sort of iterative experiment. And how do I get students thinking and learning and knowing their own minds? This could be a great tool for that. The other route is what Ben is describing, which is a wholly automated process that decides everybody's going to have the same experience. I talk to educators all the time who are literally experimenting with this technology in their writing courses, many of them doing things that I would not do and that I don't support. I'm a hard line against using generative AI for feedback at all, or grading, forget about it. I don't think we should make students write something that's not going to be read, and large language models cannot read. They process syntax. That said, I've seen some people doing sort of custom work with large language models that, as I look at it, it's like, well, that is a pretty good sort of thought partner for the student when a teacher is not available. It's not that different than what I do with my own thinking when I'm writing, and maybe they need that help because their writing practice isn't as developed as mine. To achieve that, though, requires freedom, agency, all of the things that the structures of education are not, at least in the US, are not aligned around. But if we do that, I think we would probably see some amazing things. Things that I would say, no, oh, okay. And that's a breakthrough of a kind, but it takes the human ingenuity experimenting with it, as opposed to what has happened in the institution I most recently taught in the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, which has replaced their student writing tutors, their sort of peer tutors for first-year writing students, with Conmigo, Sal Khan's TutorBot terminals, because they received a $100,000 grant to buy these things. That's the sort of mindset that I think just must be rejected out of hand if we're going to see that kind of, if we're going to see genuine human progress in using the tool of generative AI.
I'm glad someone mentioned, has talked about automation and this kind of continuing fantasy of, well, not from us, but from some of the vendors around teacher automation, but also automation as a liberating dimension of the social world that potentially could free up time for us to do the creative side of things. We could have had a whole conversation about automation. There's not time for that. But Ben, would you like to come in on this kind of question of hope and potential?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should approach AI, hopefully, that the more kind of troubling aspects are not inevitable. I think as institutions, and particularly as collectives of institutions, we can still exert some power. We can make choices about whether we incorporate more AI into our courses, whether we encourage students to experiment with it, or whether we say at certain times actually it would be inappropriate to. And I think we really should be asserting what our expectations are around AI. I think there are also some really interesting ways in which we might engage better with students around this. So there was a good example at this institution of a student running a student assembly around generative AI to gather together students' perspectives on the potential uses, but also their potential concerns around AI. So I think, this talks to gathering the views, not just of students, but of academics and of institutions as well. I do think there's also some really boring things that could be done. I was at an event in the Netherlands recently, and one of the conversations, this was particularly around AI in the schools sector. One of the conversations was about the possibility of developing public values-based procurement frameworks. The agreement in the room was basically the stuff that gets bought into schools has to go through some kind of procurement framework. And those are often led by senior managers, administrators, and often there's a kind of checklist of does it have the right functionality. So the proposal was, what if we had public values baked into the procurement system? That would lead to quite different decision-making about what technologies we bought into our institutions. So I do think, there are hopeful signs of often some quite boring mechanisms that can be used, like procurement frameworks designed in different ways, underpinned by values, that could be incorporated to approach AI in a way that would make it work for education and for educators and for students. Because I think at the moment, largely it's benefiting vendors and their investors with a big financial stake in this.
Yeah, thank you. We're coming towards the end of our panel conversation, and I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for audience questions and comments as well. But I do have one last question, which is, maybe it's a bit silly, but it's the end of the evening. It's really, so brief answers to this one, if you don't mind. Last year, so over 1,000 tech leaders called for a pause on AI development. So my question to you is, if you could, would you, let's focus specifically perhaps on generative AI, if you could, would you pause or even close down further development of AI, and if so, why? Araba. Someone has to start.
I would probably pause, not close down, definitely not, but I think I would pause because, to be honest, what's the rush? At least from a developing country perspective, 20 years ago, we were talking about mobile phones for development. 10 years before that, maybe we were talking about computers for development. Another 10 years before that, we were talking about information for development. In all likelihood, 10 years from now, we'll be talking about some other technology for development. So, I mean, people like maybe those of us here, people richer than us here, We're fine. I mean, I don't think the next generation of AI is going to, we're going to suffer if that technology does not get developed. And for the people that I think really need it, looks like it's not helping them that much, you know. So what's the rush?
John and then Ben.
Yeah, I don't wish to pause development, but I would like to hit pause on them selling products into the marketplace that are entirely untested without consideration for the downsides and that sort of stuff, because we are simultaneously creating this technology. It's the old metaphor of building the plane while it's up in the air. And these very large corporations are increasingly dependent on investment and market penetration. And I would be happy to let OpenAI and Anthropic and Google and let them go nuts in their labs making their Frankenstein's monster. Just don't send that out to terrorize the villagers. Come back when you have something useful, rather than something you can sell, which is sort of the history of ed tech. The minimum viable product, right? That's where we are. I would like it to be a maximally viable product before we have to think about it more.
Ben?
Yeah, I was the co-author of a report earlier in the year with the title "Time for a Pause." So I'm pretty firmly on the side of pausing, slowing down. And I think it's really important that educators, education leaders take a good hard look at the kinds of AI that is being pressed on them at the moment and put in place some mechanisms maybe for slowing that down until we have a much better sense of whether this stuff has any benefits, because the evidence base for a lot of the claims at the moment is extraordinarily weak, if non-existent. I think the risk is otherwise we end up with a model of learning which resembles auto-summary on demand, a model of learning in which students are simply calling up material, synthetic material that's generated by technologies that we're pretty clear now are not always as accurate as perhaps they could be. So I would, recommend a pause on this. But while pausing, I think we really need to, as a sector, put together some mechanisms for oversight, work on lobbying our regulators so that actually we have sort of AI in the future that is good for education rather than pressed on education.
Thank you. So it sounds like a consensus on pause. Thanks, everyone. We've come to the end of the conversation, but we do have time for questions, and there are many questions coming through online. So while I sort of get my head around those, could we take one or two questions from people in the audience here today? We have our student ambassadors with microphones who'll come and see you. There's a question right here.
Thank you so much.
You don't have to turn it on.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. My name is Farai. I am the CEO of an education nonprofit. We work in Africa specifically. And one of the things that we've been reflecting about is we're putting Starlink internet, so Elon Musk's internet, around 100 schools in Rwanda. And we've been invited by the Ministry of Education and ICT to say, hey, bring this year. We've got teachers that are teaching 60 to 80 kids in one class. If this is, you guys advising us in terms of how we want to move forward, and we're saying, hey, let's slow down, how do you see us integrating this opportunity within these classrooms where one teacher is teaching 60 kids, and now they've leapfrogged access to the internet by using this low-orbit satellites? And maybe that's a question for you, Dr. Araba, because you work on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think it's always difficult to decide whether a little is better than nothing, right? And so in this case, if you do have the opportunity to have some technology that is going to enable you to overcome some educational challenges, I wouldn't say don't take that opportunity, but I'd say weigh the cost benefits of that. what's that technology actually going to enable you to do? Is it actually going to get you a better education for the kids? If you are able to invest in Starlink, might that investment be better made into the human capital, teachers, right? So asking the governments, like, what's their priority in terms of how they invest in the educational system? Because oftentimes, governments actually find it easy to abdicate their responsibility to develop infrastructure and human capacity within their countries to the private sector. Oh, the tech companies are going to take care of that, so we don't need to do that anymore. I have a philosophical issue with the idea of leapfrogging, because I think there's a reason why things sometimes have to happen in stages, because there's a foundation that needs to be established in order for you to get the benefits from the next stages. So I do think that it just requires really thinking carefully about whether or not this is actually going to get you the results that you want, the contents that they're going to access from that internet link. Is it related to the Rwandan context at all? We know for a fact that most of the content online is not developed by people in Africa. It's not related to our realities. So again, if you do that analysis, then you can make a decision about whether this is actually the best way to use whatever resources that you have.
Thank you. I'm going to take one question from online, and then there was a question over here. If you could put your hand up again, we can get the microphone close to you. But I'm going to first just here. One of the questions coming in online is from Mark Corbett-Wilson. And maybe this is one for you, John. Mark says an average of one institution of higher education in the US has disappeared each week in the past decade. He says AI will accelerate this trend. Do you also believe that to be true?
I'm skeptical. There are certainly pressures on higher education institutions in the U.S., the chief one of them being demographic. There's fewer traditional college-age students than there were previously, but the chief trouble of our institutions of higher education have less to do with forces of, they're market forces that don't need to be present. The United States is, as we well know, an enormously wealthy country. It's wealthier today than it has been at any other time in its existence until tomorrow, when it will be wealthier still, and then the next day, and then the next day, and the next day. There are more than enough resources to invest in the human work of teaching in our higher education institutions and to make them accessible. And even, one of my previous books is about this, to even make the public institutions themselves tuition-free. We don't lack any of the resources for this. So I don't reject that some of these institutions are disappearing, but it's a function of an overall dysfunctional structure around how we view education as a sort of, again, a transaction, a private good that you pay for and then receive that benefits the individual as opposed to a public good which should be shared. And if we start to look at it as a public good, perhaps, yes, some institutions will no longer be shown to have relevance within that, but others that don't exist will, and that will sort of become the issue to the extent that artificial intelligence would make these institutions disappear. I mean, maybe like a low-cost credentialer that's AI shows up that undercuts the market for existing schools like Arizona State has a huge population of online students. They could automate all that and have your AI professors and still give you a credential, I guess. But why are we doing that? What is the future of people having an entirely automated experience? It's frankly a question that I think is interesting, but I prefer to pivot and say, if that's the future, why is that a future we should desire? Why isn't that a future we should actually actively try to prevent?
Thank you. Question down here.
Yes, hi there. Thank you for such an interesting discussion. My name is Dr. Kate Smith, and I am an EdTech entrepreneur. So we're based here at the Edinburgh Uni AI Accelerator. We're the current cohort. So we've invented the world's first digital professor. Okay, it's for universities, not for schools. And we're absolutely committed for EdTech for good, what you said. What we do, I'm just adding my perspective, and I do have a question. What we do is aim to reach students who are traditionally left out of the classroom. I've devoted my life to education, especially writing instruction as well. And I think there are a number of students who are left out of the classroom for different reasons. And I'm talking globally, not just in the UK. So my perspective I'd like to add is there is a chance for AI to be a force for good in university education. I can't talk about schools, I'm not equipped. And I just want to say that I've really loved the discussion, but the danger is not in a computer thinking like a human, but in humans thinking like computers. Nothing replaces a human as an instructor or a professor, but a lot of research shows that younger people trust avatars more than they trust humans. And it's a way to create accessible, personalised education for students who feel, for whatever reason, that the classroom doesn't work for them. That includes people who cannot get to the classroom because of war or other cultural reasons. So just to add my perspective, my question for you each is, do you think this is a pathway that is valid? Do you think that AI and EdTech can be a force for good in the world? Thank you.
Thank you, great question, and we probably don't have time for each member of the panel to answer it, but I think, Ben, perhaps you could.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the initiative you described, or the innovation, sorry, it sounds like needs-based design. There's a very specific need for a very specific group of children. That's well understood. That's then baked into your design. I think that's quite. So I think you said you developed a kind of digital professor. I think that development process you're talking about there is quite different from the idea that we can have some kind of stock chatbot at scale that can, funded by Microsoft perhaps, can just be applied to every high school across the US, which I believe is what Microsoft's doing with the Carmigo chatbot, which is basically a digital professor, but entirely based on what can we do with ChatGPT, to personalize education. So I do think these are very, very different sorts of approaches. I think the needs-based design based on a very, very well understood problem, and then the specification of how does the technology actually address that is a better way forward than the issue I think many of us have is this idea of kind of standardized, scalable tech that is often designed because there's a big market for it, because schools are going to spend money on it. What you're describing, I think, sounds quite different.
I agree, and given that we're neighbours in the Futures Institute, it would be quite nice to come and talk a bit more about it with you and learn from each other. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. I'm keen to take another one from online, and apologies to everyone online who's posted a question that we just don't have time to cover tonight. But Jeffrey Proudlock has asked a really interesting one to finish on, and I'll let you. I think we've got time for one answer, and I'll let you. Whoever goes for it first is the person. Jeffrey asks: is originality a thing of the past?
Ooh. No. I could elaborate, but. I write about this in my forthcoming book. I think one of the chief things we can teach future generations or coming generations is taste, discernment. That is a skill which comes in handy not just from an aesthetic sense, but a practical sense. No, originality is not over. The ChatGPT large language model outputs are the least original thing in the world. They're a literal flattening of all of us. So absolutely not. In fact, I would argue there's going to be a great increasing market for human irrationality and quirks as we become hungry for that sort of experience.
Thank you, and that's a good one to end on. So we are coming towards the end. We've reached the end of the panel section of this event, but we still have our star of the show in a way. We've got Jennifer Williams reading her new poem. So Jennifer is going to end the event. So I just want, before I invite Jennifer to come onto the stage to do her reading, I just want to take this moment to thank our panel. Thank you for coming very long distances, two of you, and thank you for such an interesting and engaging conversation. Thank you to everyone who is here in the room and online. Thank you to our amazing events team in the Futures Institute, and to our incredible producers who always produce these events to such an amazingly high standard. And thank you to our student ambassadors who always also do a wonderful job. So thank you so much. In a moment, the four of us are going to leave the stage. But before we do that, I'd just like to do a brief introduction to Jennifer. Jennifer's going to do a reading of her newly commissioned poem for this event called Spectral Learning. So J.L. Williams is one of Scotland's most interesting, important poets. Her work has been translated into many languages and she's much in demand, giving readings and performances around the world. Her most recent published volumes include After Economy, which is a collection which explores the fine line between abundance and apocalypse, and Origin, which was written during her first pregnancy and during the first year of her daughter's life, which corresponded to that devastating first year of the COVID-19 pandemic. Jennifer is really interested in extending poetry into other media and across other languages and forms, and has done a lot of work with opera, including writing opera librettos, including one for the 2023 English touring opera, The Wish Gatherer. So Jennifer is hopeful about the power of poetry to allow us to know ourselves, each other, and the world more deeply. And tonight she's going to be reading her poem, commissioned on this theme of the future of education through AI. So thank you very much, everyone, and I'll hand over to you, Jennifer.
Hello. Can I add to that list of thanks a big thank you to Sian, Bayne, for her brilliant curation of these conversations and her extraordinary insight. Can we have a round of applause for Sian as well? It is hugely meaningful as a poet to be part of these vital conversations. And within this new poem, I will be quoting from a number of thinkers and writers, including the other two poets who were each featured at previous Edinburgh Futures Conversation events, Marjorie Gill and Joelle Taylor. And the three poems will be published on the Edinburgh Futures Institute website shortly, if they aren't already there. So I encourage you to take another look and have a read after this event. I'm going to be experimenting tonight with an exciting technology called the Sound Color Project. A huge thank you to Derek Torsani for allowing me to use this evening. You'll see it on the screens behind me in a moment. It will be listening to and responding to my voice, and they have a great free website and app if you want to take a look at it, if you enjoy what it is doing. And finally, before I start, I just wanted to invite you all, because you've been listening very carefully for a long time now, to have a little bit of a stretch and take a deep breath with me. So you can sit down, you can stand up, but have a good deep stretch, a deep breath in. Maybe one more nice deep breath, those of you at home as well. And I'm going to take one more of those for my benefit, if nothing else. You can join me if you like. Deep breath in and relax. This is called spectral learning. Our minds are moving prisms of light. Jeanette Winterson. The people who work here are children, or seem so to me. Their long, dark hair in their faces. The whole place is dark, except for the pools of colored light, colors moving fish-like in these pools, cast by the screens. Sofas in front of each screen. I wander, there is a metal spiral staircase leading upwards. Drifting near one of the pools, a child stops me, offers the visor. A mixture of words, or could be another language. I'm not sure whether to put them on, not because I'm scared, but he's the man I go to once every month for a treatment that allows me to exist. His hands, his strength, tempered with gentleness, for which I'm absurdly grateful. So much worry and pain is released during the treatment. It is hard sometimes to concentrate on the beauty of the music, the movement of pain through my body. It's passing, I think. It's all passing so quickly. On leaving, he talks about his dog called Ripley, not like an alien, but ripply as the contours of her fur. She's on her way out, he says, 13 years old with cancer, but I won't cry. I'm going to celebrate the good times. That's inspirational, I reply, surprised that our thoughts are two rivers merging into one. Bodies, thoughts. The sun is shining bright through the window, making me blink after the darkness. Well, there's no other option, he says, except to break down completely. I am reading the poems Sam Riviere wrote in 2019 with Generative Pre-Trained Transformer 2, GPT-2. I don't know if I even knew what it was back then, pregnant at the age of 42 with my first child and aware of little else but the constant movement of life. 2019, and this extraordinary poem in which he, or GPT, writes, a future where violence and injustice have been replaced by compassion and empathy, where the most difficult decisions are finally put into the hands of real people, where all the dreams that we have dreamed before fade as you move out of one building into another. One of my writing teachers told me once, don't quote other writers in your poems, they might be better than you. And who are we quoting? We who are attempting to connect all knowledge into one brain. We who are attempting to build our long lost, longed for. And on the news, between election results, they talk of standardized testing as if it is a helpful thing. I learned to fold into the brace position. Marjorie Lotfi. Don't we always swallow a little more when the breath massages the spine? Here in this classroom, there is a notion that the nation exists. Grasping toward the past, it was the future that always held the coral chalice up to the light, poor coral whitened as the sea waves to death. What you will teach is, you broke that notion with your greedful mining time. It was always, and anyway, that golden classroom when the light pierced the beaker, her glass a trembling concatenation of quantum realities, as when the first burning torch was raised, as now the first equation that makes light possible always, always is. A whole nation's notion exists. The Gulf was crystal when we were kids diving to kiss on the banks of this nymph grotto weighted with tires, floating polystyrene, green bottles, blue bottles, clear poison bottles of appropriated joy. Holding my breath. What you will teach is what you believe. Waving, flinging the keyboard, popping the button on your shirt, shining desk, pounding, wet heads with first person, second person, third person, south against, north against, east against, man against, woman against, computer against, robot. I want to lift up without needing any tools. Even if you don't have kids. Even if you don't have kids, education is important because those kids, other folks' kids, when they grow up, they're going to be all around you. What you will teach is a dream. No. Reality. A notion. No. A nation. Holding my breath forever is the same as breathing into the endless utopia of space. You will hold open your hand and gold, wire, diamond, glass, plastic, silver, laser. Brace yourself. Data is water. Time is light. AI systems are rear view mirrors. Professor Shannon Valor. Darling, I told you that dope stings. It's gonna bite your finger 'cause it's fed on old things. You give it to your babies, it'll rot their baby teeth. It'll smack down all the ladies, it'll kill the black and green. Check your rear view mirror. It ain't futures that you see. It's your own eyes looking backward down the road to misery. Opportunities, personalized learning, automated assessment, tutoring and support, accessibility, administrative efficiency, data-driven insights, ChatGPT. What will the chalkboard be when I'm old and my daughter thinks I'm useless because I can't make whatever it is work? Challenges: data privacy and security, bias in algorithms, digital divide, teacher training and resistance, over-reliance on technology. ChatGPT. My dad hated me getting my first tattoo when I was 17. What happens when I get my first chip in my eye, under my skin? Future trends: AI-enhanced learning analytics, virtual and augmented reality, lifelong learning and upskilling, ChatGPT. Putting my phone down, I walk out into the garden, barefoot, and feel the dampness of the grass beneath my feet, and below my feet, the soil and the hair of all the people who work deep beneath the earth or in radioactive pits so we can have mobile phones, who sit all day in front of screens, clicking for pennies. Images so violent, they cause PTSD. Who fight in the robot whore houses over sex robots whom they love, while the forests burn and the rivers dry up. I feel beneath my feet the sweat of all the people who do not have computers or gardens or enough food, who walk with a pain in their back, dreaming of light, lightness. How much it hurt you to lose your mom, and now you've been having to pack up your dad's house all around it. The man who taught you to focus a lens, aim a telescope at the stars. The man who taught you to add and subtract the value of a coin, of a pound. They inquired how long he would live, as if you were a guru, an actuary, not his stargazing daughter, to calculate how long the money would last. How do you teach that kind of algebra? How do you calculate how much pain can tension a body. If you could download him, if you could make him live forever, a never-ending, how do you estimate the cost of the absurdity of grief? A child remembering their hands. Joelle Taylor. I'm scared because I birthed you into a world of discrepancies where night keeps eating day and eating, where men work in teams to build a new world where they can give birth and women are sex toys, where bodies are broken by machines and machines are implanted into starving minds. At your school, there is no playground. Research shows playgrounds are safer when dangerous. Let there be hammers and let there be nails along the path of your learning. Let there be broke glass. Let there be stones that bruise your bare feet. I want to raise a warrior, girl hero shining her knife into wires, inventing how to bind, blind. When you cry, it hurts me more than when glass cuts into my skin. I fell the other day, and it shocked you to see my eyes pouring stars. You came from my body, are no longer of my body. I gave birth to machine, my womb filled with wires, bled acid out of eyes, seeing yellow, fluorescent, flagellating wounds in the air. Your screams were zeros and ones, but more than that, simultaneous blooms of weeping as human shattered the light bulbs. Note, simultaneous, parallel, not ever after. I gave birth to light and was blinded. Girl machines rise from steel trolleys, wheeled seedlings, no dirt talk and soil are planting the world, teach flesh bodies old tricks. It's love, they say, galactic mycelial love, white snowflake stardust and thousands of bluebells, an epic of cobalt, fling open skirts to the moon while kneeling in dirt. The girl machines ask me, Mama, do you remember dreams? We dream of fingers, hands held aloft, of feeling the dirt on our skin. I have learned two important lessons of late from pools of colored. One is that I can really tell stories in poems. From pools of colored light, arms emerge and legs. The other is that when I was young, I avoided meaning because I could make little sense of the world. And now, from pools of colored light, arms emerge and legs, a fire new idea. The light teaches us to breathe beyond our animal selves. There is dust, enough dust for a kingdom of heavens, and so many screens, the eyes themselves are screens. The place where I was alive echoed at night. A little girl walked barefoot through the corridors, searching for her mother. Ma, she called. Mama. And a mother who lost her husband and son laid herself down in a bed and didn't get up. The room filled with smoke was where the terminations took place, the other where sleepless doctors cradled machines connected to people's hearts. We don't cry anymore, and no longer and never again will I be in pain. Now I have learned to be something more akin to light, to breath, the substance in which dust is suspended, memory. The term spectral generally means relating to or resembling a spectrum or a ghost. ChatGPT. You can see me because light is bouncing off of me. Some light I am absorbing. Some light is passing through me, like I am a ghost. See, behind me there's a lily weeping golden pollen into the bright, infused air. Where do I come from? Some place invented by a child, in her dream, the one where she was in ancient Egypt exploring the Sphinx and then in a tunnel flooded with light. When she told me this, I felt very humbled by the miracle of life. Naked, 4 years old, kneeling in her still warm bed, her eyes the color of a storm-ravaged sea, looking off to the side at something she could still see quite clearly.